Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Friday. Welcome back to Window Watch / preview show. We're going to do a little bit of looking ahead to Norwich City's trip to the South Coast tomorrow to play Southampton. We're going to be reflecting on what's been a pretty frantic week in terms of transfer activity. Most of it, of course, as we expected on the outgoing front. And it has seen Norwich City's first major, I guess, if you want to bracket it like that, outgoing of the transfer window in Max Aarons, who has joined Bournemouth, which was never in doubt, I don't think. Connor Safford joined by Paddy Davitt to reflect on all of that, plus look ahead to Southampton. We want your comments and questions as well. Anything transfer related, anything Southampton related, get it in below, whether you're watching this on YouTube, Facebook, or the social media platform formerly known as Twitter. Get them all in, and we will flick them up on the screen and debate them as and when. Paddy, how are you? It's been a busy old week, hasn't it, in the world of Norwich City?
Yeah, it certainly has. Nearly had a full start there, Connor. Yeah, but even more so. I mean, I was kind of at the start of the Aarons cycle, and then unfortunately, I've got a 3-year-old who's a potty training. So I was far more interested in those elements than where Max Aarons is going to end up. And as it turned out, it was the South Coast rather than West Yorkshire. So, yeah, really interesting. Great for us. Kept the cycle going all Tuesday, was it? Was it Tuesday, Wednesday? I lose track. So, but when the dust settles, confirmed last night on Bournemouth's official channels that Max Aarons is now no longer a Norwich player. He's a Premier League player with Bournemouth. Good luck to him. You can see the reaction around his socials once the move was confirmed, and Max was quick to pen his own thoughts and the way they've been received. It says everything about what a player he was, what pride a lot of Norwich fans had in watching him develop, come through, be part of that really fantastic era under Daniel Farke, and will now, I'm sure, wish him all the best as he goes on and hopefully onwards and upwards. And we'll get into the reads of the who, the why, the where, the what, but for me, the figure that Norwich have managed to get for a player who had 12 months left on his contract, I think represents very good business. So on a financial point of view, makes sense. And on a footballing side of view, well, just go right back to the summer. Stuart Webber sat down with us and other media and really mapped out what has come to pass with Max. And then Max, there was a few quotes from him subsequently, but this window was the time for all parties to shake hands and go their separate ways, and to the mutual benefit of all concerned. And I think, I don't think there's any point in harking back to the values that were attached around Max Aarons and the level of clubs that were linked to him in windows past. That's gone. We were dealing with the here and now and a player who was now into his final 12 months. So from Norwich's point of view, I don't think they're getting a better financial deal. And for Max, despite it looking nailed on, it was going to be Daniel and a reunion with Mr. Farke in Leeds. It's the Premier League. And I'm sure at the start of the summer when, in his own mind, he felt the time was right to move on, he was looking to get back to the Premier League, not, with the greatest respect to Leeds, maybe Championship and then hopefully back to the Premier League. There's no guarantee of that. Southampton were obviously another club in this equation, and the same applies to them. He's actually gone back to the Premier League, and a club who had a very good season last season, albeit under Gary O'Neill, who's no longer there. But you see the other business they've done in the last 24 hours, the boy Scott from Bristol City, very, very highly rated young player. So it looks from a distance, observing it, that Bournemouth are really trying to build something sustainable, and hopefully Max can aid that process, and he goes on to have a very long career in the Premier League. So, not the most straightforward of transfers in terms of the end game, but great for us and what we do, and I think ultimately great for Norwich, great for Max Aarons. I mean, I'll throw it back to you, Connor. Your whole thoughts on the actual saga itself, rather than the specifics of it, because I'm sure we'll get into that as we go through today's broadcast. But what do you think? Max Aarons, a Bournemouth player, good move?
Yeah, I think so. I think probably the move that he deserves. I think there were maybe a lot of Norwich fans looking at it who, whilst would have obviously been happy for him if it would have been Leeds, I think there would have been an air of uncomfortableness because they're in the same division. They are a competitive rival. I'm sure some people would describe them as a promotion rival. Whether you can bracket that at this stage or not is maybe up for debate. But I think there was probably a lot more ease with him going to a Premier League club and going to Bournemouth in particular. Really, really interesting how it panned out. I mean, we got wind, didn't we? That it looked like it was going to be Leeds. We obviously then reported that, and I think you wrote in the piece, which was the understanding at the time that even though it looked like Leeds were edging in front, there was still people buzzing around in the background, and obviously subsequently we've learned that was obviously Bournemouth who have won the race, and then obviously Southampton as well, who is from what we understand, also had a bid accepted for him in those similar terms, which is a £12 million package, which I agree with you. I think represents fantastic value. Whether you want to split that between what they've paid initially, transfers, are split between years and installments and whatnot. So it's never quite easy to split in a simple way, which is why there's lots of different splits out there, because it probably depends who you speak to. So yeah, really interesting. I think in the end, I probably sat back last night when it was confirmed and thought, yeah, okay, I think that's probably the best move for him right now. I think that's probably the best move for Norwich City right now as well, because of the optics of him going to a championship promotion rival, to him going to Daniel Farke again, which would have been great from his perspective and a great narrative. But again, purely through a Norwich City lens, I think they will look at it and be pleased that he's gone to Bournemouth for the sum of money that he's gone to. And they could have sold him earlier on in the window. They could have bitten the bullet and taken a lower fee to get him out. They kind of held their nerve a little bit. They waited for people to come to the table, and obviously Leeds coming to the table and agreeing a package made it quite easy for other clubs then to do the same and just to match it. And then it was up to the player. So for as much as maybe people want to talk about Norwich doing or getting one over on Farke and Leeds, I'm not quite sure that's the reality. Ultimately, it was a deal agreed with 3 clubs, and then it's down to the player and his representatives to thrash out a move. And he decided that the Premier League, Bournemouth, was the best option for him at this moment in time. And I think that's probably fair based on where the clubs were. But let's go back to the start then, Paddy. Let's talk about that initial bit of the saga, because we said it was we reported, I'm losing track of days, but Tuesday morning, Wednesday morning, we reported this.
Tuesday morning, yeah.
So it must have been sort of Monday evening when the whispers began to grow, let's say, from our perspective. Just talk to us about the mechanics of how this has played out, and the aspects that maybe looked like they were going to take him to Leeds, but then saw him go to Bournemouth. That whole situation was just incredible, really, to observe, to follow, to try and pick up strands of, because, as we said, Tuesday morning, when we put that story out there, even though, as we said, there were other people in the background, and you can go and read the story, it is in there, it did look like he was Leeds bound at that point.
Well, he was. That's indisputable. And we don't need to get into he was halfway through a medical, then he bailed out. He wasn't having a medical, or he had undertaken it. I'll leave that to others to decide the semantics. But he was in Leeds. It was moving to a conclusion. I spoke to people at both ends of this deal, and they were singing from the same hymn sheet that Max Aarons was, in all probability, going to be a Leeds United player, and the fact that he was in Leeds and a medical had been scheduled would tell you how far down the path it had gone. And for Daniel Farke, why wouldn't you want to reunite with a player who, essentially he moulded, gave him an opportunity, launched him, and then sat back and watched as he got linked with Bayern Munich and Barcelona and whoever, off the top of my head, real high-end clubs in Europe were looking at this player. And that was very much down to the player, of course, Max taking his opportunity and seizing the moment in his career. But the fact that he had it in Daniel Farke, and to be fair, I think he's referenced it in his Instagram message / Twitter message once the move was confirmed last night, that who he really owes a debt of gratitude to is Daniel Farke. And I would imagine that aspect has been very tough for Max, because, the fact that he probably felt, Daniel, I want to, reunite with you. And I feel at Leeds, I'm joining a club who, okay, this season, would be a championship rival, but I think the expectation is if it's not this season, it's a case of when rather than if they get back to the Premier League. Absolutely humongous club with the fan base to match, and now that American ownership who aren't going to be satisfied with Leeds in the championship. So, okay, it would have been in the shorter term been championship. I think we can all reasonably expect Leeds to be back in the Premier League, whether Daniel's the head coach or not. So, you could understand why it made a lot of sense from Daniel's perspective and Leeds, because you're not just getting a right back with him. We saw it in the Euros with the Young Lions. He's equally comfortable playing left-hand side. And by all accounts, that's where Leeds are a little bit light on the left-hand side of their defence. Obviously, Sam Byram has gone back into the mix there and, was even playing against Sheffield Wednesday last weekend. But they've got injuries in other areas of that back line. But I think it's the left-sided area. And, of course, you're buying a dual-purpose fullback in Max Aarons, very comfortable on the left, even if he's made his trade on the right for Norwich primarily. So from Leeds' point of view, that would have represented very good business. And for Daniel, I'm sure he would have looked at Max Aarons as a real signature signing for what he's trying to do with Leeds and try and turn around that club. So, yeah, it didn't surprise me when probably Monday afternoon onwards, we got a sense that, maybe Leeds were leading the race and that it was actually accelerating at a pace. But by the same token, they weren't the only show in town. We know there was the situation with Southampton and them selling Livramento to Newcastle. And even last weekend, there was a lot of talk and that Southampton would definitely take the plunge. And we know Matty Gill was, we're talking about Daniel Farker being a formative influence on Max, but you go back even further, Matty Gill.
Well,
between him staying in the academy and not at one point. Yeah.
That was exactly the story I was going to tell. It's probably down to Matt Gill that Max Aarons wasn't released as a Norwich City youngster at one stage. So you're absolutely right to point out that relationship.
Yeah. So again, much as we've mapped out why Leeds were interested, you can see why Southampton were interested in terms of the characters involved in those clubs, but also looking at a player who, in an area of the squad, if you're Southampton, they obviously need to address. So you could see that. But by the same token, as you rightly say, Connor, I don't think it was a case that when we've launched that news on Tuesday, Bournemouth have suddenly realised, Max Aarons is available. You can guarantee that there will be Premier League clubs who would have been very clearly aware of Max Aarons' contractual status, and because this is how it works inside the game, that there was probably serious interest from Leeds as we moved into Tuesday onwards, and that if they wanted to bring in a player of Max Aarons' availability, they're going to have to move pretty swiftly. And what you said in your opening statement was spot on. Ultimately, if clubs meet Norwich's valuation for their player, then the decision more often than not switches to the player and his representatives and who they feel is then going to be a better fit. And if, as turned out to be the case, the interest from Bournemouth firmed up to a point where Max had a decision to make and his advisors on Tuesday, he's clearly looked at it in the round. And I'm sure the Premier League cachet of Bournemouth is a huge factor. We were led to believe as well, in terms of his sort of personal circumstances, being in and around London would be quite advantageous to him in terms of his next move. And I'm not saying for a minute that Bournemouth is a suburb of London, but it's a lot closer to London than maybe West Yorkshire and Leeds is. So that must be a factor, I'm sure, in play. But ultimately, he will have felt that footballing wise, Bournemouth is the best place for him now to move on. And you can see why, because as I say, they look like they're a very progressive club of trying to do things the right way, signing the likes of Aaron, signing the likes of Scott. They've gone out and made quite a bold appointment in terms of head coach. Tough on Gary O'Neill, given he kept him up comfortably, that they decided, no, you're not for us. But maybe that also underlying message that Bournemouth are going to try and do something in a maybe very Brighton-esque kind of way, if you want to draw a parallel, very similar style club in terms of scale and reach, and albeit maybe Brighton would balk at that and say they're a bigger club than Bournemouth, but you can kind of see in that kind of how you bridge from being an aspirational Premier League club to an actual one who are, like Brentford, pushing the envelope and trying to stay there over the mid to longer term. And if that is the case, and that's what's been sold to him, then, it makes a lot of sense. And as you say, Connor, I would agree. I think Bournemouth at this stage of his career is probably as good a move as you could get. And then it's up to him now. Who knows if he goes on to establish himself at Bournemouth and Bournemouth play well and have another good season or two, then I'm sure will be interest from higher up the food chain, because that's the nature of it. So, yeah, it was a surprise, and we can see the reaction from the Leeds end. Their fan base were absolutely apoplectic as Tuesday moved from we're signing this player to we've lost this player, and I'm still seeing that today. They're very unhappy how this has panned out, and I'm sure if Max Aarons has the misfortune to draw Leeds in a cup tie this season, he's in for a hot reception at Ellen Road, but he will know that, and I doubt he'll be bothered in the slightest. And I've seen one or two quotes attributed to Daniel since it's gone through that, he's a quality player, but if a quality player isn't fully invested in what they're trying to do, then it's best for all parties that, they move on and he moves on. And that was the decision ultimately. And I'm sure Daniel won't hold any grudges or hard feelings. It's business, isn't it? So, yeah, no, as I said, great for us in terms of what we do. That it was a saga with plenty of legs, not just one sort of outcome. And ultimately, we'll watch from afar with great interest now how it goes for him. I think he had gone stale at Norwich, if we're honest. I think the last season or two, I don't think Dean Smith really did him any favours in terms of trying to adapt his game and maybe make him more defensively focused than that free-flowing, effervescent attacking option that we saw under Daniel in the best periods of his Norwich career. So I think really, just purely from a footballing point of view, I think he needed a new challenge. He had a brilliant time with England over the summer. He'll be full of confidence and he'll want to show what he can do now, and that, he can be rightly considered among some of the best young right backs in the country. It's a very competitive field, very crowded field, but he, I'm sure, has aspirations to do what he's done with the young lions with the senior England team. Well, to do that, let's be honest, he needs to be playing in the Premier League. So good luck to him.
Yeah, good luck to him. And it was really nice and actually rare yesterday when he put out that statement, and the clubs went through their kind of unveiling and announcements of this transfer. I didn't see one negative really from a Norwich City fan. It was gratitude. He doesn't owe Norwich City anything. Over 200 appearances, homegrown, academy graduated, 2 championship titles. I think you'd be hard pressed to find a better servant to Norwich City than Max Aarons in terms of professionalism, everything that he dealt with, constant speculation. The one that stands out to me always is the day, I think Norwich were playing Preston, the day all of that Barcelona noise came up. And it was kind of expected that he wouldn't play because young players don't play in those situations. And you'd imagine his head was spinning all over the place. No, come 2:00, his name was in the starting 11. And from memory, I think he had a really decent game. And I think that sums up Max Aarons to a T. So, yeah, Norwich fans will wish him well. And I think there's the acceptance that everyone's kind of shaking hands and gone, yeah, this is for the best. So that's nice. You don't always see that in football, and it's not always in football that you get to leave on kind of good terms and your own terms. So it's going to be interesting to see what Andoni Iraola, who is the new manager of Bournemouth, very highly rated, gets out of Max and a Premier League move as well. Lots of questions, of course, Pad, because Norwich have received a package of 12 million. Obviously, not all of that up front, anywhere between 7 and 9, depending on who you speak to and who you want to listen to. So up to people who they want to do on that, and then obviously a series of add-ons as well. As I say, I always find it's semantics. Really, it's a 12 million package. If you say that, you can't really go wrong. But it doesn't change the thrust of the debate really about how Norwich now go about using this money, if at all. I mean, I've been a little bit shocked by some reactions to various things, because I think we've been saying for quite a few months now. Certainly, I remember saying this in Germany, and I remember saying this after Fashnak was confirmed, that unless Andrew Omobamidele leaves Norwich City this summer, they probably won't go back into the transfer market. So it feels a bit weird that that's maybe been communicated elsewhere, and there's been a little bit of an adverse reaction, because that's kind of been what we've been saying all summer, I think. That is the situation as I see it still, Pad. I mean, they signed Jack Stacey, Callum Fisher in the building as well. Obviously, Barley Mumba's been sold to Plymouth. So there's your 2 right-back positions already squared off. Milot Rashica isn't even in the planning at the moment. They've signed Borja Sainz, who's going to be back pretty soon. Christian Fashnak's been added. They've got a contingent of wingers. John Rowe, obviously, we don't need to speak about him again after what he did last weekend. They've got a contingent of wingers there. So they're not short in either of those positions where the effective players are. So again, I guess just to reiterate that message, this money is not going to be put into, I guess, anyone kind of expecting now a splurge of deals in wake of Norwich City selling Max Aarons or even Milot Rashica down the track. And we will come on to him in a bit more detail later on. Anyone expecting that to happen off the back of these transfers should prepare themselves for disappointment, shouldn't they?
Yes, sadly. We don't want to be the bearer of bad tidings, but I mean, on the right back element, Sam was down at Colney yesterday and asked David Wagner specifically about what does this mean for the right back situation, and the answer, go and watch it, go and listen to it, go and read it on our channels, was very clear. Very happy, and obviously we referenced them there. Stacey and Fisher are Norwich's fullback options on the right hand side moving forward, and that isn't going to change. Certainly not in terms of Max Aarons' departure. Sorry, yeah. Go back to, I'm trying to think which pre-season game it was. It was the Toulouse 120-minute epic in Kufstein, Austria, where we've had exclusive chat with David after that affair, and he said that is us done in terms of the main bits of their business, with the caveat if they were to lose. He didn't name him, but it's been made very clear to us that person who, if they go, they will twist again rather than stick. Out of Aarons, Rashica, Omobamidele, it's Omobamidele. They will not twist. Now Aarons has gone. They won't twist if Rashica, as we expect, goes. But they will if Omobamidele goes, because Grant Hanley, we know, is, albeit back in light training, if you want to attach that label, but still many weeks. I think David said after what might have been prior to the Hull game, still weeks/months from being seriously considered to be playing games of Championship football. You've got Tompkinson and Warner, two very young, inexperienced players. Tompkinson currently injured, but due back relatively shortly. But still, two very inexperienced centre-backs. And that leaves you Gibson and Shane Duffy. So, and can you go into the season with two experienced players who have had sort of fitness issues in terms of Gibson, certainly in recent seasons? No, is the answer. So that is the situation. That was the situation that we've been led to believe has been the case internally from certainly German training camp onwards, that they have a target list ready to go in terms of centre backs should Omobamidele depart, and I still believe that scenario will play out. I think there's enough noise in and around that player now to suggest that things will accelerate as we get into the final 3 weeks or so of this transfer window. And if that is the case, then yes, Norwich will splurge, to use that phrase. How much of that funds, who knows? Time will tell. But they certainly will, if he departs, make another signing. And that is a very consistent position with what we've heard all the way through the summer. But that as recent as the Toulouse friendly, David Wagner himself mapped out, and he should know ultimately because he's driving this process alongside Stuart Webber and Neil Adams. So, yeah, if Omobamidele departs, they will sign a player. If he doesn't depart, then I don't see any major incoming business. Of course, around the margins of the squad, yeah, there might be bits and pieces. There's the loan option still. I don't get any sense that they're actively looking to do anything there loan-wise, but they're elements that could accelerate. We've seen how quickly the whole Max Aarons thing played out this week. We could get into the last 48 hours of a transfer window and something presents itself in terms of a loan in or out. So things can happen around the margins, but in terms of your frontline transfer business, as we sit here now, 3 weeks out, there'll be nothing happening unless Omobamidele departs.
Yeah, or another player that they're not expecting to go, which again at the moment looks pretty unlikely. So that is the situation, and a lot of people as well, Paddy, asking about the money involved, because they've recouped a decent sum for Max Aarons. There will inevitably be the questions of, well, that's not being spent on players, so where is it being spent? We've mapped out before the club's financial predicament and loans that have to be repaid and interest rates having gone up, and loads of various elements. There's obviously a share issue going on in the background, which the idea of that is to generate funds as well. So all of this kind of paints the impression that money is needed to fill other gaps. Is that fair at the moment? Is that your assessment of where potential sums of money for a Rashica deal, an Aarons deal would probably go at the moment, or at least that's where the priority is at the minute?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I mean, I did ask Zoe Weber at the fans forum held by BBC Radio Norfolk at the forum in the city, did they need to get to a transfer surplus situation because of all those attendant football costs, if you want to bundle them in that way, but the sort of the non kind of squad transfer element of the business and the expenditure. And she said, no, it's not an aim that this window has to end in a transfer surplus. I mean, it may well end in a transfer surplus, but that isn't being driven by financial considerations, was her message. Stuart himself, I think it was either to us or it was one of the other round of interviews, kind of talked about, we aim to sell some players, we will generate funds, we will need to buy some players, but there may be scenarios that play out that's almost rainy day money kind of thing. And again, that cuts back to what you're saying about, it isn't we're going to take in X, we need to set in terms of signings that will generate in money from sales, and then we need to spend the same again in the same window. That's not how these things work. So, yeah, I think it's entirely plausible, and that's why I put in the caveat in the previous answer, where we know there is a target list in terms of Bamidele, but what sort of bracket of player they're willing to spend on, that's the intriguing element, and that might tell us a little bit more about where they see the finances in terms of what they can now feasibly spend in a hypothetical situation on Bamidele departs. Because if you've banked, and as you say, when I say banked, I don't mean they've deposited the thick end of 12 million in their bank account in the last 24 hours, because it doesn't work like that. But if you've brought in something in that region, a 12 million pound package, there's the Rashica sort of back and forth with Galatasaray seems to be settling around the €6-7 million mark. You could add that. You've got the Madison sell on, couple of million there. I'm doing it on the back of a fag packet here, metaphorically, and then on Bamidele, anything, I don't know, let's hypothetically put that in even on the lower end of the scale, 10 to 15 million. You'd hope it would be more than that, but if all of that combined, that's a substantial amount of money. Do I think Norwich would then turn around and go 20 million pound plus on a centre back? No, is the answer. But it's having the ability to do business, but not just in this window, because the reality is the season may develop that they need to go again in January. And if they need to do that, then they need funds to be able to do that. So, yeah, I think it is very unrealistic to think that if they accumulate 20-25 million pounds in a combined outlay this summer from all their outgoing business, that they then look to spend 20-25 million, because that completely downplays the situation which was very clearly mapped out in those last set of recent published accounts, and the fact that they're borrowing against future earnings. If they're having to do that, then clearly there has to be some pragmatism and realism around what they can feasibly spend in terms of the transfer market between now and the end of the window. And as you say, there is the share process in the background, but as it stands, that's still in the background. That isn't impacting this window. So that's for something that could happen in future windows. But in the here and now, in terms of what they can feasibly go out and spend in the remaining 3 weeks, that's very much has to be reflected about the overall running costs of the football club. There's no two ways about it, because as we know, as we're told ad nauseum, it's a self-funded model, and that means that you can't go out on a limb and spend money that you may need to divert into other areas of the business. That's the top and bottom of it.
Yeah, and of course, what you tend to find with transfer fees is when they do arrive, they get accounted for in different places. So that it just gets sliced all the time, and it gets funneled into different places, on infrastructure, on wages, on bonuses, on staff, on recruitment, on various different other projects, on filling holes. And by the time you've maybe removed all of those layers, you're left with a chunk that maybe then can be reinvested. And worth adding as well, given that we've been speaking about Bamidele, I think you said it there, they do have, just to reiterate this again, they do, because we have said this before, they do have a list of targets ready to go should something get sanctioned there. So they are prepared in the event that Andrew Bamidele does depart. And I think me and you are of the same opinion that both him and Rashica, I think we'd both be surprised if they are still here come the end of the window, which probably leans us into that debate on Omar Bamadeli. There were obviously some fresh links of Bournemouth yesterday. Obviously, the clubs have just done a deal for Max Aarons. AC Milan as well have been discussed for quite a lengthy period of this summer, although I think the last reports in Italy were that there was a dispute in terms of how much he was worth, and AC Milan maybe not being willing to meet a price that Norwich City had set. What do you make of where we are with him? He was obviously on the bench last weekend, but came on. It's going to be interesting to see if he starts tomorrow, given obviously he replaced Ben Gibson, who struggled a little bit last weekend. What do you make of where he finds himself at this moment in time? Because it's clear that there's an expectation that he will depart. Yeah, how do you sum up where we are? It feels like one that could ramp up very, very quickly is kind of my feeling at this moment in time. There's probably a lot of noise, and I guess we're probably just waiting for the substance behind that noise at the moment.
Yeah, and I think because the Premier League are back this weekend, that adds an urgency to it then, because you're into the meat of a season and, you know, a handful of games before the end of the window, and that starts to frame where clubs feel they are. Have they got enough in their squads? Do they need to go again? You know, and of course, you've always got that backstop that we're approaching deadline, and you know, it's now or never kind of thing. And as we see in every single window, there's an acceleration from the speculation part of the spectrum to actual business and deals getting done, and clubs realizing they need to maybe press the button on a lot of targets. And yeah, for me, I'm not sure about the Milan thing. I mean, it sounds quite glamorous and alluring, but
well, it's a bit Max Aarons Barcelona, isn't it? You know,
yeah. I mean, obviously they had great success with. I'm trying to think who was the English centre back who went over there.
Tomori,
yeah, exactly. So, and you can see why they might be looking to the English market, and that type of profile of defender, really, you know, athletic, modern, good in possession. But I look at Milan and I think, are you looking at Andrew Bamadeli in the here and now? I think that's a hell of a stretch. I mean, they were in the closing stages of the Champions League last season, wasn't it? If I'm not mistaken, I think they played Inter, didn't they? Yeah. So competing at the top end of the Serie A, I just don't see that. It doesn't seem to make. I mean, even before you overlay those last reports from Italy, there was such a marked divergence in the respective values of where Norwich see that player and where Milan were reportedly willing to commit to. That I don't see how you bridge that. So, yeah, I'm sure he is a player they're aware of and a player of interest, but it feels to me more like the end game is going to be Premier League again, like Max and, you know, Bournemouth. Yeah, I mean, we've discussed it, and some other potential clubs are out there. You know, Fulham, maybe. You were saying before we started recording that, you know, that they've got a young centre back who's getting linked with the Tottenhams of this world. If I go back to the start of the summer, we had the whole sort of situation with Palace, and was it Mark Guehi, and he was getting linked to, I think it was Chelsea.
United have been linked as well, haven't they? So
exactly. So in this kind of domino effect of there may be Premier League clubs now who fear that maybe they've got young, progressive centre backs who are going to get picked off by some of the bigger Premier League clubs. Therefore, they're going to need to go into the market. So yeah, I can see, for me, a Premier League suitor coming along and meeting Norwich's valuation, and with the player himself, where we had this whole, by Stuart Webber's own admission, firm interest in January that they rebuffed, and I'm sure Andrew Bamadeli was fully briefed on that and was in the loop all the way through. But you know, he's not starting games of football. He can't get past Ben Gibson and Shane Duffy at the minute in a Championship side. So is he going to want to kick his heels as a third choice centre back in the Championship? No, is the answer. So yeah, it feels we're in a bit of a holding pattern with him, and I think that will get swiftly resolved between now and the end of the window. I just don't really see now a scenario where Andrew Bamadeli is Norwich's third choice centre back. I just don't see that at all. So, but it's a difficult one. It's a difficult balance for David Wagner, because he will probably feel that as well. But as he reiterated yesterday at Colney, you know, until it's done, it's not done. So, do you use the player or do you feel, no, maybe it's going to be Duffy and Gibson for the foreseeable, and I'd rather go with them and bed them in, because his priority clearly now that the season is up and running is winning games of football and putting points on the board. So, you know, it's a difficult one, but it would seem, if you go through the back end of pre-season, and of course then when the whole team news dropped, that he feels for him it's going to be Duffy and Gibson, and I'll be very surprised if it's not Duffy and Gibson at Southampton tomorrow afternoon.
Yeah, I agree. And then just finally, of the trio, I guess, that have dominated the transfer window discourse in the last few weeks, Milot Rashica. Now, it's worth adding on this point that the Turkish transfer window goes on a little bit longer than the one in this country. I think about a week longer. So it goes a week deeper into September. And I think if memory serves, it wasn't until sort of early to mid-September that he signed for Galatasaray on loan last season, having obviously featured, I think, in 4 championship games and an EFL Cup game. So that's a portion of the season that he was involved in. So really interesting, this one, Paddy, because I've seen fresh reports in the last 48 hours that suddenly Galatasaray's interest in Rashica maybe hinges on selling Zanilo, who's reportedly going to go to Aston Villa. They've signed another right winger, Teti, on a free transfer. Not Alex, a different one, Brazilian winger. And it's been a really interesting one throughout the summer because it's not gone away. Everything from the Galatasaray end has been, we want Milot Rashica. He wants to come to Turkey. He wants to come back, obviously, after a very successful last season. There's clearly this disagreement in terms of both fee and agreement and structure of payments and structures of fees and whatnot. And kind of feels like it's in a bit of a holding pattern again. You've got Fenerbahce buzzing around in the background, German clubs, as we know, and as we've said before, buzzing around in the background. I'm probably quite shocked that we've got to this stage of the summer and Milot Rashica is still a Norwich City player. Don't feel, similarly to Andrew Mbamidele, it doesn't feel like he will become the end of it, certainly from the end of the Turkish window anyway. What do you make of where we are with him? Because he's been looking, he's been watching in the stands with hood up, sometimes sunglasses on. He's definitely been good on the old-fashioned choices, but he is training. He's a few weeks away. David Wagner said 3 weeks, which I don't know, if you were a cynic, not that I am, that would take you to about the end of September, or the start of September, sorry. So be the end of the window, wouldn't it? That David Wagner is maybe suggesting that he could return. What do you make of his situation and where we are? It feels like it's just a case of maybe who folds first, even in terms of where the clubs are, who buckles first. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the Zaniolo element to this, I think that's obviously key because, again, like we're talking with Mbamidele, you know, if Gala moves that player on, it creates a spot in an area of the squad where he could fill, and they'll have the finance to certainly, you know, get this deal over the line. It feels like it's been very incremental throughout the summer. I don't think there's any issue in terms of the Gala and the Rashica part of this equation. I think that's, if you some of the more well-informed Turkish media outlets would suggest that that's already been signed, sealed, and well, not signed and sealed, but it's been agreed verbally. Surely, in terms of the personal terms, wouldn't be a barrier. So it really comes down to Gala and Norwich being on the same page, and it doesn't feel like they're a million miles apart now. So, you know, I would think there's a factor in play that Gala are, you know, progressing through the Champions League qualifying stages as well. I think they won their first leg of the third qualifier 3-0 midweek, so you'd feel they're through there. You said there's a fourth qualifying round, so you know they're on the cusp of the group stage, and if they get into the group stage, then that opens up, you know, even more finance. So I don't think this deal, my understanding would be, it's not going to fall down on a few €100,000 either way. I think if we're in that kind of ballpark, which it feels like we're probably there anyway, between now and effectively another month of this could go on and play out, then it will get done. I thought it was very quite amusing actually from David to attach a timeline yesterday, which would essentially say Rashica isn't going to be an option for me until this window is closed domestically / almost closed in Turkey. So, you know, it's almost like I don't need to be asked about will he be available to play midweek at QPR or Millwall at home or Huddersfield away, because he's still completing the same pre-season block that the rest of the team did. I thought, yeah, that's quite inspired for messaging from Mr. Wagner on that, because the reality is, again, go right back to Stuart Webber speaking to us at the start of the summer on Rashica. He said quite categorically he will not want to come back and play championship football. Well, I can guarantee there is nothing in the intervening period from early May to early August that has changed. He will not want to come back. He didn't want to play Championship football 12 months ago, so why would he want to play now when in the intervening period he's gone off to Turkey and won a title over there, playing for a club who could be in the Champions League. He's adored by their fan base, it would seem, from afar, observing it. So he's spoken about the family element of it and the close links between, obviously, Kosovo, Albania and Turkey. And, everything you've heard, seen, read, observed would suggest he wants to go back to Galatasaray. And he certainly doesn't want to go back to the Championship and Norwich City. That is pretty clear. So, yeah, I think much like Umar Daly, he will not be a Norwich player when the window closes / in Turkey.
Yes, I agree. Let's get into a couple of comments then before we look ahead to tomorrow's trip to the South Coast. I'm going to start with this one from Sam, which I think has been fairly popular in various Norwich City circles. I think we've answered part 2 of his question, but the name Rob Newman, I guess, is an interesting one. Lots of people maybe getting quite excited that he was at Carrow Road last weekend, and he was at Carrow Road last weekend for that whole game. It's
not that unusual, though, Connor.
Well, this is what I was going to caveat it with. He was there for a lot of last season, a lot of games last season. He lives locally. I think there's maybe a lot of people adding 2 and 2 and getting 5 here is what I would suggest with that. There's obviously a lot of politics going on at West Ham at the moment as well with David Moyes and various power struggles, if the reports are to be believed. And he's obviously very closely linked to David Moyes. And I think there was a report in the Daily Mail to suggest that his power has been kind of diluted at the club because they've obviously got Mark Noble in director of football role. They've appointed Steiden, I think his name is, in a technical director role. David Moyes is obviously propping that all up as the head coach / manager. So you've kind of got a lot of tussles and fights going on over various players. And it feels like maybe Rob Newman isn't quite at the top table that he was. He's obviously clearly got links to the football club. He's still local, having played for the club as well. So I guess, yeah, just to say he was at Carrow Road, but that's not unusual, Pad. I mean, do you have anything to add about Rob Newman? I guess he's an obvious, isn't he, link for a sporting director role. And I'm not that surprised to see his name being circulated by supporters as one of those possibles. And I'm sure there's countless possibles involved. Norwich have obviously recruited an outside external agency to get a real feel of the market. And it's not something that I think either of us expect to really accelerate in the coming weeks stroke months.
Yeah, I mean, there's no real, you don't get a sense that this is dominating the thoughts of the people who are shaping the direction of travel. I think it's very much, as we've discussed in the previous 40 minutes, it's probably more about players and transfer maneuvers than it is a sporting director transfer maneuver in the next 3-4 weeks, certainly. But yeah, I mean, we've heard the same things, that probably Rob Newman is a sporting director candidate of interest. I think that's safe to say. Why wouldn't he be? As you say, you map out his credentials, then you put on top the Norwich City dimension. Neil Adams would know him very well, I'm sure, from their playing days, and there'd be 1 or 2 other links as well, I'm sure, in and around it. So, yeah, it's separate to, or maybe as part of, an external recruitment process. Of course, why wouldn't you be looking at a Rob Newman as a potential candidate? But I don't get any real sense that we're accelerating and he's on a fast track and this is going to play out in very short order. I think, as Zoe Webber said, the fact that it was only whenever that forum was, I think it's only about a month, 5 weeks ago, maybe, that they were at the point where they were just about to appoint the external headhunters, to use that terminology. That would suggest that they're very relaxed about it and they're willing to take their time. Again, the whole Stuart Webber, he is off to Leeds. That's all definitely gone very quiet. And if he was, I don't think what happened with Max Aarons in midweek has probably helped his candidacy on that front. But so I'm not getting any sense now that they need to act swiftly because potentially Stuart isn't going to be here in the short term. So yeah, but is Rob Newman going to be on a checklist? Of course, I would be amazed if he wasn't. And yeah, as you rightly say, Connor, it's probably as much going to be about what plays out at West Ham now, because you read the reports and it does feel like there is a power struggle, maybe between Moyes and the people who've come in there now in this summer, and if that bleeds into a poor start to the season and Moyes is gone, hypothetically, then things could move very swiftly in terms of what that meant for Rob Newman. and his future in
Yeah,
the game.
and also, let's sort of dip our toes into the pool of speculation. If you're Norwich, do you want to pay a compensation for someone, or do you want to wait until they're out of a job?
Yeah, you've got it in one. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I would suggest the latter on that one, but yeah.
Exactly. So, not to suggest that I think we've mapped it out. I think it's an easy link, and we'll see what happens, but nothing to suggest that there's anything imminent on that front, and that's certainly not the noises around Stuart Webber at this moment in time. Let's look ahead to tomorrow then, because I think a lot of the questions we have kind of answered, unless Adam can flash some up that we haven't. Southampton, Russell Martin, all of those various elements. You know how a Russell Martin team is going to play. They're going to dominate the ball. They're going to try and kill Norwich with passes. Quite interesting because David Wagner is happy, or David Wagner's teams are happy to play without the ball. We saw that in pre-season. They're happy to play in transition. There will be spaces for them to transition into if they can turn the ball over. So for me, in my head, I look ahead to this game, and to me, it feels like whoever does what they're going to try and do better will probably win, which sounds simplistic, I know, but maybe in the extreme here, because Southampton are going to enjoy lots and lots of the ball. If they can break a Norwich press, if they can create opportunities at will. Nathan Tella, clearly a wonderful footballer at this level. You only have to see what he did at Burnley last season. Armstrong as well. Edozie on the other side looked really bright against Sheffield Wednesday last weekend. I know there's a lot of uncertainty with their midfield, but Will Smallbone, a very, very good option. Lots of really good players. David Wagner said they were one of, if not the best team in the Championship tomorrow. So if they, this season. So if they do what they can do and do it very well and break Norwich's press, and I think there is an opportunity with that because I don't think they've fully mastered that yet. If that happens, then Southampton, I think, will win this football match. But if Norwich get the press right, if Southampton struggle, if the spaces are there to exploit, you do feel like Norwich could get some joy here. It feels like the type of game that, because of the way they've kind of tried to shift their recruitment, it feels like one that they could have some joy in. Paddy, how do you kind of see this panning out tomorrow? Because it feels like it's going to be a bit of cat and mouse, I guess, and maybe risk and reward from both sides. How do you see this one playing out?
Well, what I take on it, I mean, we're recording this pretty much at the same time Russell Martin was scheduled to do his pre-match media. So, I'm assuming that when it gets around to Ward Prowse and his future, that he's not going to be involved this weekend because there's a lot of talk around West Ham, and he's not going to be playing if there's an imminent move to West Ham. And he is such an integral part of that team. You saw how good, even at Sheffield Wednesday last weekend, he was. There was a passage of play. I think it went to about, whatever it was, 8 or 9 minutes of added on time at Hillsborough, and Southampton have got themselves in front with Che Adams 2-1. You're thinking, well, Sheffield Wednesday are going to have a right good go here, and they could not get the ball off Southampton, and it was very impressive. The cohesion and the calmness, and Ward Prowse set the tone there, I thought. And if he's unavailable tomorrow, that doesn't help them, I don't think, in that situation. Smallbone, you mentioned there, I've seen him linked to Sheffield United, if I'm not mistaken, in the last few days. So there's speculation around him. Yeah, I think David Wagner and his players will absolutely be relishing this. I mean, he referenced yesterday at Golney about drew a parallel with the AZ Alkmaar friendly, who are another team who are very good in possession, move it very quickly, very composed. And Norwich did structurally and in terms of individually cause them quite a few problems. I know it was a pre-season friendly, but they did cause them a few problems on the night. Jack Stacey was very good that night, and I've got a pretty good feeling that I think Norwich will go and get something because it is still a work in progress for Russell Martin. It's his first competitive fixture at home. He will, of course, be keen to impress, but if they're not able to break down that defensive organisation from Norwich, and then I'm pretty sure Norwich will create problems going the other way. And then we'll see, there was periods of that game last week at Hillsborough. I thought Sheffield Wednesday did cause Southampton some problems. And, while I'd also concur with David, I think over the entirety of the piece, when we get to May, we're looking back, I think Southampton probably will be one of the promoted clubs. But it's still very early days in terms of Russell Martin and Matty Gill. And then there might be an opportunity for Norwich to exploit a little bit of, work in progress vibe for me. Yes, they'll be full of confidence and they'll be buoyant and there'll be a new feel around the place. But Norwich just need to, dig in and realise that they're not going to have anywhere near enough of the ball. I think there was a comparative of last week over the 2 games. I think Southampton had something like 350 more passes in their play than Norwich did. So that's a huge differential. It tells you what type of game it's going to be. But this Norwich team do look better on the counter, quick in transition, with the pace of Rowe, with the pace of Yanulis or even a Stacey with his attacking instincts. Onel in the mix as well. So yeah, I think there's something here for Norwich tomorrow. But you're right, defensively that will hold the key. If Norwich can frustrate and make Southampton go lateral and not get in behind them and through them, then I think Norwich will cause them problems. Set pieces could be a big factor in this game as well. And I just hope, for me, it's Gabby Zara. If he can continue on in the same vein, I mean, he had a ridiculously good game. It did go a little under the radar last week, but if you look back at his
9 key passes.
That's what I'm saying, yeah. I mean, phenomenal. And fair enough, John Rowe deservedly claimed the plaudits, and Stacey was good, wasn't he, as well? But understated brilliance is not an overstated phrase for me in terms of Zara and his impact on that Norwich team and what they were trying to do with the ball. If he's as good tomorrow in that key area of the pitch, then I think Norwich get back on the coach and they've got something to show for it. You, Connor?
Yeah, I agree. Just to sort of comment on James Ward-Prowse, because I've had a quick look. Russell Martin confirms he won't be involved tomorrow. David Moyes has also confirmed that he's currently undergoing a medical at West Ham. So that would suggest he won't be available. They are trying, I think Russell Martin has confirmed they're trying to get someone to go the other way. That's rumoured to be Flynn Downs, former Ipswich Town player, of course. I think we are past...
Didn't he have him at Swansea?
He did, yeah. And I think we are now past the point of registration. So I think if that deal now gets done, Flynn Downs wouldn't be available to play tomorrow, but I need to double check that. He's kind of mentioned Stuart Armstrong, Joe Aribo, Adam Armstrong as potential replacements for Ward-Prowse in that area of the pitch. So still very, very strong options nonetheless. But yeah, I agree with you. I think there is something here for Norwich. I think it's the type of game that you look at a Wagner team, and I felt watching Norwich throughout pre-season and last week as well, kind of feels like they've geared them towards going away from home. Interesting again in terms of narrative, how David Wagner was very quick to say they weren't the favourites. I think that does help in terms of that underdog feeling to how he wants his team to play and how he wants them to affect the opposition. I think all of that is very, very useful. Big away following. I think Southampton have nearly sold out in home areas. I read earlier this morning there was about 300 tickets left. So I think it's going to be a really good sort of affair, and obviously lots of personal elements to Russell Martin for it as well. So I think this could be a really, really good game of football. I don't think we're going to see Norwich have a lot of the ball, but it will be about how effective they are when they have it. And yeah, I'm with you. I think there is something here for Norwich. We're going to save our score predictions because we usually do them on the team news video, and they'll change about 4 times before we're sat at St Mary's. It will probably be about 24 hours or so on from here. Paddy, just finally then, I mean, it's been a frantic week. How do you assess where Norwich City are in the window? It kind of feels pretty set now. I think we've mapped it all out. Given this is window watch, it feels right to end on a transfer related note. Feels like the focus, certainly the next few weeks, is going to be on outgoings, doesn't it? And probably good for David Wagner that one of those players, I guess, one of the 3 has gone now, and you'd hope to see, as we are with a lot of the other elements of the market, that feels like pieces are moving now, doesn't it, in the transfer window more widely? Yeah,
I think, well, in terms of the transfers, I think it's going to be all about Omobamidele. I think Rashica, I don't foresee any scenario that he is a Norwich player. So you could almost, I know deal has to be put in place, finances have to be agreed, contracts exchanged, but you could almost take him out of the equation now. It's, for me, this remaining 3 weeks of the domestic window is all about Omobamidele, and because if he goes, they'll bring somebody in, and that'll be really quite exciting, I think, in terms of a final flourish. If you're a Norwich fan, who they look to bring in, because they're going to have to clearly spend money, and probably some relative to what they've done, certainly in the early part of this window, a lot more money, I would think, to bring in the type of talent who they feel could add to the group they've got. There's no point in bringing in, and Stuart Webber made this point, in terms of 5th centre-backs, and what's the point in spending money on a a fifth centre back who doesn't impact or doesn't improve or isn't better than what you've already got. So
how do you attract them as well? I mean, that's
it.
another point, isn't it? Who's going to come to Norwich knowing they're sat behind 4-5 players? It's just, yeah. I mean, in reality, of course, you'd like to insulate yourself against injuries, but if you're doing that, suddenly you're throwing millions of pounds at players who aren't going to play. So it doesn't make sense as a strategy, particularly when the funds are as tight as they are at Norwich.
Exactly. So that for me is really intriguing. Not so much on Bamidele and where he departs, because that will play out, but it's what it means for Norwich in terms of an incoming. Because I'd like to think that it would be somebody who of a stature who could come in and you could immediately think they could be a first frontline option in that central defence. Because I think there's still, for me anyway, I would still have concerns about Gibson fitness wise as well as football wise as we move through the season. I think Duffy will prove himself to be a very, very astute signing, but it does feel it needs something else in that area in terms of finished article. I'm not talking about Topkinson and Warner because we just don't know with Grant Hanley and his situation. You can't categorically say that he's going to be up to speed and ready to step back in and lead from the front. So that's an interesting one. The only other thing, we've not touched on it, but it's probably worth just throwing in, because there's been a little bit of a line out this morning again around Tim Krul.
Yes, sorry, I forgot to mention that. Yeah.
That we could conceivably see that playing out, that Tim moves on, because I think there's a feeling, again, maybe if it's right for all parties, that a deal could be done. He isn't, it would seem, going to be dislodging Angus Gunn anytime soon. So from a footballing point of view, does he want a season on the bench? And if you're Norwich, from a financial point of view, do you want a player who's within the spectrum of Norwich's wage bill? I think probably towards the higher end of it. That's funds that could be reallocated, couldn't it? So I could see a scenario that possibly somewhere. I mean, John Ruddy himself is getting linked with Luton. I saw earlier this week. In terms of going in and being maybe a number 3. There could be opportunities maybe in the Premier League in terms of that status for Tim, and then comes down to him and his personal sort of preference. And he's got 12 months left here at Norwich. If he could go and get 2 years somewhere else and he gets Premier League uplift in terms of salary, that's quite attractive, I would imagine. So with that carrot that he could go in and maybe fight for a place in a Premier League squad. So yeah, I think for me they're the two facets that will play out from here really.
And Norwich, if that situation did map out, you think Norwich should go in and get another goalkeeper to sit beneath Angus Gunn?
You would think they would have to, but I think that's then when you probably do look at your loan options, really, and you could almost look at it in a window-to-window scenario. Again, we've just talked about why would you go and bring in a centre-back who's basically not going to play and is just sucking up wages. It'd be the same in terms of with Angus Gunn. He is Norwich's number 1, will be until the point where he's no longer probably at the football club, and hopefully that's for a few windows yet. So why would you bring in another? Essentially, you'd be replacing like for like. What's the point in letting Tim Krul go and then bringing in somebody in a similar bracket in terms of status and financial package? That makes no sense. So I could probably see them deciding to go loan route and then maybe review it again in January, because ultimately Angus Gunn, if he stays fit, is Norwich's number 1 and will play most weeks. So that / Bamidele for me is where the focus is probably going to be on Norwich's remaining 3 weeks of this transfer window.
Lovely stuff, and I'm grateful you brought it up because I completely forgot to mention it with everything else that's going on. Thank you very much for watching, everybody. We will of course be at St Mary's tomorrow. We'll have Team News Live around this time across our social channels. Plenty of build-up analysis and obviously reaction to David Wagner's comments and the Max Aarons transfer over at pinkun.com. And as that shiny button below Paddy says, you can subscribe to the Pinkun Plus as well. We're building a nice little community over there, and we will be at every single Norwich City game, press conference, kick of a ball this season. We will be there to report on it for you guys. So that is the best place to get our full coverage. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your Friday. Safe trip to those travelling down to St Mary's tomorrow. We'll hope to see a few of you there, and we'll see you again very, very soon.